Aitsquale. Good day, everyone. Thank you for joining us in launching our 2018 annual report. First, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional territory that I hold dearly in my heart and am able to present on today, which is Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh. It's a place that grounds me, that provides me the strength in order to persevere, reminds me of who I am and why I do what I do in my day-to-day life. I also would like to take the opportunity to introduce the commissioners that are attending with me. So we have Francis, Tanya Corbet, and Marianne joining us today. And Tom sends his regrets. I'd also like to take the opportunity to acknowledge the staff, because if it wasn't for the staff, our annual report wouldn't be as excellent as it is. And so I really need to acknowledge the hard work and dedication of my team. So in our annual report, we're covering off complex issues about Indigenous rights and land ownership that are currently being debated throughout the country. Canada and British Columbia are both promising new policies to fundamentally change their relationship with Indigenous peoples. Treaty negotiations are providing the innovative answers to many of the questions being discussed. In this year's report, we write about these new approaches, how they are affecting modern treaties, and why treaty negotiations are still leading the way in Indigenous rights recognition in Canada. Since Canada's inception, Indigenous nations have been championing nation-to-nation recognition. The governments of Canada and British Columbia are now undertaking new initiatives that will result in providing new policy and improved legal frameworks. This political alignment on Indigenous relations has seldom been seen since the launch of the BC Treaty negotiations process in the 1990s. I will now briefly review the federal and provincial initiatives that are included in our annual report, which covers some of the innovative developments that are expediting and improving treaty negotiations. Canada embarked on a process of engagement with Indigenous peoples to develop a recognition and implementation of Indigenous rights framework. In that, they're outlining a number that relate directly to modern treaties, such as the federal framework will replace outdated and antiquated policies. There will be new approaches to fully embrace Section 35 as a full box of rights. And as such, treaties are meant to establish a pathway for implementation of Indigenous rights. Extinguishment of rights is off the table. Treaties can include bridging mechanisms which support First Nations in negotiations to transition to new policy approaches as these approaches are developed. The importance of bridging mechanisms is that they will enable treaties to evolve as policies evolve. These mechanisms are essential and will provide clarity for Indigenous nations as they consider their pathways forward. Treaty negotiations is a key mechanism to advancing reconciliation in British Columbia. Together with the Treaty Commission, the principals are working on a number of proposals to transform treaty negotiations. One main transformation is the recognition of Indigenous rights. That is the foundation of negotiations, transforming the treaty relationship into a lasting government-to-government approach that is able to adapt to changing circumstances, and a relationship that continues to support self-determination, nation-building, governance development, and capacity building. These are all necessary and are being achieved at the tables through treaty negotiations. As I reported, there are new approaches being explored. For example, at 3 advanced Stage 4 tables, they are developing a memorandum of understanding to expedite the transition to Stage 5 of the treaty process. These MOUs are very unique and demonstrate that the negotiations is flexible. Another innovation is looking at Stage 5 multi-year strategies. These are designed to support First Nations, including treaty negotiations, and the Treaty Commission has developed an adaptable multi-year strategy for Stage 5 tables. These strategies will capture important rights recognition mandate commitments, as well as the implementation of the UN Declaration. The last notable policy change is about contribution, funding, and loan forgiveness. As of April 2018, loan advances for First Nations participating in treaty negotiations were replaced with 100% contribution funding. This is a result of several years of hard work, dedication, and discussions amongst the principals, especially within the federal government. Although this is a significant policy shift, existing loans have not been addressed as of yet. But, and I say there's a big but, Canada indicated in the 2018 budget that addressing existing loans will be explored, including loan forgiveness. And I'm an optimist. So 2018, a year in review. Thought I would share and highlight a number of significant milestones and events that have transpired in 2018. For one, Northern Shuswap Council had an agreement in principle signing this summer. The parties signed an AIP, advancing the table from stage 4 to stage 5. Investing in multi-community First Nations, such as NSTQ, is nation building through treaty negotiations, and they are some of the best opportunities in the country for reconciliation and nation rebuilding. Another highlight is the BC Alliance of Modern Treaty Nations. This summer, 7 modern treaty nations signed a memorandum of understanding or cooperation, establishing the alliance. This alliance of constitutionally recognized Indigenous nations will strengthen their voice by jointly advocating for priority concerns that are unique to BC, which will include some items like revenue sharing, service agreements, co-management of fisheries, lands, and resources. Another highlight or event. This year, the Clay Treaty was updated, and the treaty was voted on by the community. And unfortunately, the treaty was not accepted. And as disappointing as this was, the vote is a clear expression of community will and self-determination, and the Clay vote must be respected. Their citizens have spoken, and we respect that. I also want to take time to draw your attention to our legal opinion that's been provided by Blakes, Castles, and Graydon. And it's how to operationalize free, prior, and informed consent. As most know, Indigenous rights and treaty negotiations are complex. They covering important aspects such as legal, cultural, political, and public policy matters. This legal opinion determines that the BC treaty negotiations process facilitates voluntary, independent, and transparent nation-to-nation negotiations, culminating in constitutionally protected agreements for shared sovereignty and for reconciliation. We can proudly say that our process is a rights recognition process that is entirely consistent with free, prior, and informed consent. I want to take a moment to acknowledge the commissioners. And I'm going to start with Tom, who sends his regrets today. Tom has been a valuable team member. As the first commissioner appointed from a modern treaty nation, his insights, his perspective have been invaluable to the commission. As well, the success of the negotiations process would not be where it is today without people like Tom, who are so dedicated to advancing reconciliation through BC treaty negotiations. And as Tom will always share, Huu-ay-aht First Nations exemplifies the benefits a treaty can bring to small regional communities. Take time to acknowledge Francis, who has been a commissioner with us since 2015, and brings his expertise as a negotiator and a leader of Tlowiki. And then I'll move down the table, looking at some of our new commissioners that I am excited to introduce and share some information. Tanya, who brings her expertise as an executive counselor at Tsawwassen. Tsawwassen is a nation that has been implementing a modern treaty, unlocking the economic potential of their lands and transforming the surrounding region. Their nation has attracted over $1 billion of investments and more evidence that treaties are successful. And I reflect on Amazon's recent decision to open a major shipping facility on Tsawwassen Treaty lands. This exemplifies how modern-day treaties are providing First Nations with significant opportunities for economic prosperity. I also want to acknowledge this past spring that Commissioner Jerry Lampert has retired from the Treaty Commission after dedicating 10 years of valuable service to the treaty negotiations process. With that, in May, we welcomed new federal appointee, Mary Ann, who brings expertise as a negotiator and a former chief of Homolko. So with that, concludes my report, Heitskepka, and now I'll open it up for questions. Thank you very much. Anyone can ask questions.
Just give an overview of the portion of the report that provided the legal opinion. What are some of the substantive components to that opinion?
So some of the substantives that come out of the opinion is that the treaty negotiations process is aligned with free, prior, and informed consent. And looking at the legal landscape, recognizing that there have been a number of iterations through jurisprudence, developments in Section 35, the implementation of the Declaration, that treaty negotiations are meeting and actually beating the standards set out for free, prior, and informed consent. And I do believe that others can probably also augment my comments as well with regards to the legal opinion. But and I guess on to add to that, it's building on our previous legal opinions that we've had done with regards to looking at shared sovereignty and economic prosperity that we've done over the last number of years. And so with this year, I thought it was really important to look at exactly what treaty offers when it comes to free, prior, and informed consent, and actually what it offers to implement the UN Declaration. And given that it's the Treaty Commission's mandate to facilitate reconciliation and the implementation of the Declaration, we thought it was really important to highlight FPIC. Don't know if any of my colleagues want to add. Well, we can have coffee. Oh.
I don't have a question. I'll just add a note of gratitude. I want to thank the Commission for your hard work over many years, many decades now, as keepers of the process. And you play a valuable role in supporting reconciliation in this province. And I'm grateful for the work that you do, and I look forward to working with you more in the coming year.
Thank you, Chris. We appreciate that. We appreciate the support of all the principals that are here today. Coffee? Oh, Howard.
Good morning. Thank you very much for your very concise report. My question is in regards to follow-up that First Nations Summit did a wonderful job in regards to getting government to move to a more positive fiscal relations in the sense of contribution. But they also said that they would look at loan forgiveness, and I was wondering what BCTC would be doing in regard to supporting that, because this government only has another year and a half mandate to conclude, and it would be somewhat frivolous if we didn't attempt to get that done sooner rather than later.
Extremely important point, Howard. Thank you. So the Commission has constantly been advocating for this issue to be addressed with the federal government. So every time we go to Ottawa and talk with senior officials and ministers to apprise them of the situation and the opportunity to address this, we do. We've also we'll be sending a letter, I believe, going out today with regards to loan forgiveness and where that should be going. And I do believe we're looking at the new reconciliation committee as well as all the ministers involved, so that they know that we're continuing to push. We will be going to Ottawa in October. And I also, you know, we have been encouraging nations to also take this issue up as well, because it does impact them directly, and that they also need to be advocates within this process within that realm. However, it shouldn't be contingent upon whether a nation writes a letter, but I think there should be more activism from nations as well. And I think as a concerted effort to continue to push this process politically, that's what should be done. But I do realize and recognize we have a very short window when it comes to the budgeting process, as well as our political timeline.
A follow-up question or point is that, may I suggest that we send letters to the BC Liberal Caucus, simply because they are the beneficiaries here in British Columbia as well. And more importantly, we have a couple of cabinet ministers who can probably and hopefully influence their colleagues, because it's cabinet that's going to make that decision.
Yes. Great point. Thanks. And we will do that.
Celeste, I think it's also important to note that as one of the principles, the summit has been pushing for a principals meeting to take place sooner rather than later, so that we can have this discussion, because it's been months since the principals have come together to have a face-to-face, and that really is not reflective of, you know, having a better relationship and working towards some of these substantive issues that are facing tables. And so I just think that, you know, this is one primary issue that needs to be addressed right away. And for the federal and provincial counterparts that are here, it would be nice to have that message reinforced within your respective governments to, you know, to push for this important principles meeting. Because the more that we can do as principals, the more it can support the work the Treaty Commission is trying to do too.
Very important point. Thank you. So now I do think it's time for coffee. Thank you.